This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network, an extension of the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.
Hey, this is Erin with Cornell Studio Supply located in Dayton, Ohio, exclusive distributor of Jen Allen templates and Put a Lid on It t-shirts. We are a proud sponsor of this episode and the Brickyard Network. Find all your pottery and ceramic sculpture needs, including the largest stock of GR pottery forms at cornellstudiosupply.com. At Cornell Studio Supply, we are owned and operated for potters, by potters.
Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com. Welcome back to episode 517 of the podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. Today on the show, I have Ashlyn Pope. You will recognize her from episode 508, which was called Clay Roots, and that was recorded at this year's NCECA conference in front of a live audience. Ashlyn was a part of that panel, and I'm happy to have her back today for a one-on-one interview. Ashlyn is a ceramic and fiber artist of Gullah descent who describes her work as representing restriction and limitation of the Black body throughout American history, and the hope and vision to realize a different future. In this interview, we talk about incorporating woven elements into ceramic vessels, educating through art, and her recent fiber portraits of afrofuturist queens. Ashlyn is an assistant professor and associate director of the Joyner Institute for Gullah and African Diaspora Studies at Coastal Carolina University, which is right outside Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. If you'd like to find out more, you can check out her website. That's ashlynpope.com. Before we get to today's interview, I wanted to thank some of the folks that have recently donated to this podcast. We are listener-supported, so I'd like to thank Eddie Jackson and Sarah Chenoweth Davis for their recent contributions. If you'd like to get involved yourself, you can do that at talesofaredclayrambler.com/donate. Without further ado, we'll get to the interview. Let's start talking about where you live and where you teach at Coastal Carolina. Can you just kind of explain that region to people?
I'm currently living in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Now, where I live about 13 minutes or so from the beach, which is an incredible location to live by. And so my family is Gullah Geechee, and that means we are people of the coastal South. And so kind of getting back to a location where there's water on a consistent basis is incredible, because we find that as a healing property. So when bad days and all of those things, you kind of just go by the water and kind of hearing the crashing, being able to put your feet in the water, kind of changes a mood. It allows you to kind of feel like you're wiping slates clean, which is lovely. And so I teach at Coastal Carolina University, which is in Conway, South Carolina. And so the distance between Conway, South Carolina and Myrtle Beach is only 10 miles. So I'm very close to work as well. And so it allows people from that area in Conway to have access and connection to the water as well, and our students to have access and connection to the water as well. And so it's one of the most beautiful locations, one, because it's warm most of the year. And so you can actually go to the water just about at any point in time and feel connected, which is lovely. And our students I mean, I had students who were like, "Oh, Miss Ashlyn, I'm sorry I'm late for class because I was at the beach." And I'm like, "Of course you were. Of course you were at the beach." So, like getting a chance and opportunity to kind of like release any stressors you have as a student or a professor and just be near water is like one of the most beautiful things you can possibly do for yourself. It's a regenerative thing, and a lot of people don't get to have that. And we're lucky just because of where we are located and how close we are to the water, that our student body can take advantage of those kinds of things too. Um, and so another important thing about where we are in Gullah Geechee lands. So being a coastal people, our kind of territory for the Gullah Geechee people exists from about I want to say about Jacksonville, maybe a little further north than Jacksonville, North Carolina, to about Jacksonville, Florida, and maybe just a little further south than Jacksonville, Florida. But it's the coastal region. So anywhere near bodies of water to about 40 miles or so inland is Gullah Geechee land and territory. And if you don't know anything about the Gullah Geechee people, it's definitely worth researching. But I'll tell you a little bit about us. We are a people who we have our own culture. We are considered a national culture in America as well, sanctioned by the government. We have our own food. We have our own language. We have our own arts. We are a full culture of people.
A big part of that is food, as you mentioned, and you're a ceramic artist and you at times make functional pots. So is there a connection between sort of the food you grew up with and the pots you make specifically now, or is it more symbolic?
It's a little more symbolic, a little less of what I grew up with eating. So a little bit about my history. I was born and raised in New Jersey. My family was one of the people part of that great migration that moved north from this rural South. So that was my great grandmother who left. Or not my great grandmother, my grandmother who left. My great grandma stayed. My great grandma stayed here, but my grandma moved when she was about 17. She gave birth to my mom when she was 17, and my mom was born here in the South in South Carolina. But my mom was a baby when she left, so she also grew up in the North. And so the food that we ate was still very much Gullah Geechee food. We just didn't know it. So I didn't make those connections of the type of food I was eating to a culture until I was a little bit older. And honestly, it took me coming to teach here at Coastal Carolina to really see the connection. I knew that my family ate like this, but I didn't realize how many other Gullah Geechee people ate like this. It's a lot of seafood. We eat a lot of seafood. Of course, coastal, you catching your own food. But basically, what makes it really interesting when it comes to the food of the South is that just what we think of Southern food is Gullah Geechee food. And so, like, like fried chicken or grilled chicken, green beans, shrimp and grits, those kinds of things are all a part of what it is to be Gullah Geechee. When it comes to my pots, I make them more as a symbolism and less about the exact types of food we're eating. I do think about our food, but it's not necessarily the way that I'm designing my ceramics at all. It's really my work is really meant to be more of like a symbolic nature of like connection more so than it is about like what gets put on the dish or in the dish.
For the listener, I wanted to kind of break up the bodies of work that you do. So I think about the big vessels that have braided parts that come up and connect. Like that's kind of one body of work. And then there's smaller pots that are either shown in installation or like they're functional pots that you sell. And then there's also some fiber work, some quilting. So we're going to talk about all three of these different things. But I wanted to talk about the large vessels because it relates so much to sweetgrass, to like basket weaving, which is a big part part of the coastal art movement. So can you talk about that, like learning about sweetgrass weaving and that as an aesthetic choice in clay?
Sure. So a little bit of this requires some Ashland history still. So I'll give you a little bit of my background with that as well. So like I mentioned before, I was born and raised in New Jersey. And so I didn't grow up within the culture. And when it comes to sweetgrass basket sewing, I've never learned it. And the thing is that they are passed down from generation to generation how to, but then also the designs that come with the aesthetic of a sweetgrass basket. And so I remember one year, I might have been maybe 20. This was before I even started putting my hands in clay. Um, I was in South Carolina and I happened to like come upon a sweetgrass basket sewer on Highway 17, which is where like their market is located. And I asked her if I could be taught that I'm Gullah Geechee, that I just never had the opportunity to learn, that no one in my family is an artist but me. And I would love the opportunity to learn how to sew a sweetgrass basket. And she, of course, tells me she can't teach me because it is something she passes through lineage. And I was like, oh, and I got so sad about it. And but at that moment, it was also a catalyst for me to find it unacceptable, because it's like I'm a part of this culture, yet I'm living on the outskirts of it, and I did not like that understanding. I don't like necessarily being told no, Ben. So to be told no is like a really hard one for me, and so I'm not very good at accepting it gracefully. And so instead, I was just like, well, I mean, you can try to tell me no all you want, but I'm gonna figure it out. And so that's kind of what that gave me a catalyst into the clay once I kind of started making in clay, to explore how that representation can come across through clay. And I spent a very, very long time kind of thinking about it more than I did actually making it. I was in grad school and I was kind of playing with forms. I was getting ready for my grad thesis, and I'm just like sitting there waiting for something to dry. And I'm like, oh gosh, like it's so close to dry, but it's not quite there. It definitely needs about another hour. And I'm like, but I've been rolling around in my head this idea of making a sweetgrass basket coil. And I said, okay, well, let me just do this while I'm sitting here. Let me play with it. And so I just kind of started doing what had been rolling around in my head for the last about year and a half. And I flipped this item over once I kind of like made this coil and wrapped it around itself. And I flipped it over and I said, oh, there it is. So like it was like a discovery upon happenstance in a way, but not really. Like I had like it'd been rolling in my head. I just never tried it until that point. And so it ended up showing up in my grad thesis, and it was my last month of my grad school experience, and so it was really an opportunity to take that, which I had just discovered in this moment, and bring it with me to my residency. Now, when I got a residency at Lawrence Art Center in Kansas, that's when I really kind of dived into thinking about like the vessel itself and less about the coil itself. They no longer were now two separate items or beings. They now needed to kind of coexist as one. And when I got there, I made my first sweetgrass basket out of clay. And I was like, oh, it's beautiful. But I was like, something's wrong. I was like, because the reality is I'm not making baskets, and I'm not trying to make a basket. I'm a ceramic artist and I want to keep the history of ceramics in my forms. And so that's where I ended up exploring the connection between the smooth body vessel and then these elements of sweetgrass basketry of clay on the surface of them. And so that's when, yeah, I thought I kind of started playing with how those would then like connect to the surface of the piece, and then whether or not they needed to rise and become decorative elements, or whether rise up the form, let me clarify that, and become decorative elements, or if they needed to exist at the bottom. Like, I really then began to explore what that meant.
Yeah, and I think sometimes they provide a physical structure because they will, like I saw this vessel that I think of as being like a nupe vase. It's the Nigerian pot that's like round at the bottom, but then your sweetgrass elements came up and there's a whole nother pot there. And that is badass when it becomes structure, but you can see through it. Like there's something so beautiful about that. So can you talk a little bit about like that, using these sweetgrass elements to actually elevate another form?
Now, that one was like kind of a new form at that time when I was doing it, when I was in my residency. And I'll first talk about the structure of the rounded bottom vase in the first place. And yes, it is inspired by Nigerian pots. But it was also just African pots in general. Like, a lot of African pots had rounded bottoms, which I loved. And I realized that they were, because they were using them for storage vessels. And as storage vessels, they go into the ground in order to be cool and be treated almost like a refrigeration item. And so it was this really beautiful idea of like needing to connect African roots to my own body, and what it was as my own experience. And so then I started playing with this rounded bottom form. And then like when I looked at the piece, I said, oh, what if there's space in between? There needs to be kind of some breathing room. What happens when there's like this different level of connection, where what's supporting something else is the sweetgrass? And I think at that moment, that's when it really became important to me that the piece always had sweetgrass feet. Because it was the idea of like standing on culture, kind of needing to exist in a way that the body had to have a support system that was sweetgrass. And so, and that only gave me a chance to play with like a double play, where it's like I'm holding up, like something's holding me up and I'm holding something else up. And so it was just a really beautiful opportunity to kind of play with that idea. And so I'm going to probably go back to playing with that idea a bit more too. But yeah, that's kind of how it all stemmed in my head at the time.
Yeah, and those vessels reference the body so directly. Like they don't look like a figure, but even the way you describe them, we describe them like they're a body, like the body of the pot, the shoulder, the hip, the lip, like all these things. And when you have those sweetgrass elements, then it becomes something that almost looks like woven hair, or something that has that connection, like body adornment. So is that connection there, or am I reading too much into that?
No, it's there. It's absolutely there. Because I mean, there's the reality, like I can't be separated from my hair as well, right? So and that's what makes me different as a Black female too, right? I have a different textured hair than others. I have a body that can potentially be different than others, right? And so I've got this opportunity to kind of play with this idea where it looks like it could be braided hair, but then it could also be sweetgrass. And I'm not trying to remove the cultural understandings from either one of those, but only embrace both of them. And so it gave me that opportunity to play with that and understand how hair is such a powerful understanding of my own body as well. And I'm speaking about Black bodies, and we all have these we have different hair types, and we have different skin tones. But what I thought was really important was to work with like this rich brown chocolate clay that really spoke to the brown that I see in my family, but then also like the brown that seems to be very much ostracized in society. And so it's not the deepest of Black people, but it is definitely a color that once you get, once you know that the history of like the brown paper bag kind of story, then you understand that there's this moment to kind of normalize a skin tone that is more chocolate than just this brown paper bag that's considered acceptable. So, or lighter, brown paper bag or lighter, right? So that was considered acceptable at one point in time, and make it more beautiful. Let it become this beautiful aspect of the world.
In your talk in Nsika, one of the things you were talking about is like black is beautiful. Like this clay is beautiful. I am beautiful. Like this is an expression of this beauty, which in ceramics, like that personification that the pot is of the body is something that goes back cross-culturally in lots of different things. But you saying that in 2024 today, living in the South, I think that's really important.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's, I mean, the reality is that we live in an America right now that is struggling with its identity, right? Like we're still seeing that there's a strong connection to Black and brown bodies that's not beautiful. That has become very aggressive, hateful, and it's an opportunity for me to make a beautiful pot that represents my body and people who look like me, and normalize that and let it be beautiful instead of this stereotypical understanding of hate. And so I wanted to kind of change that, and or begin to kind of change that, as or be in a lineage of people who want to change that, and I'm just grateful to be a kind of in that conversation, and that my work gets to exist in that conversation whether I'm there or not. You can't help but look at my pieces and see a body, because I draw heavily on the female form, right? And taking into account her hips and her breasts and her torso, and then thinking about how like I can adjust those forms and shapes in order to relate to a Black body or any body, honestly, that has different forms, like a different form than others. So that's why you'll find that some of my pots have really wide hips and a small chest, or a really small hips and big chest. And I play with that form because it's important to show that there's difference in body, but that no matter what color it is, it's all beautiful.
There's times in which the way you show pots also gives meaning. So I'm thinking about the massive flag piece that's cups that are showed in a way that mimics stripes, like the stripes of the flag. And I think that's automatically a critique about America. So can you talk about using that symbol of the flag and just more about that piece in general?
Absolutely. So that piece, I call it Birth of a Nation When Cotton Was King. And so kind of already stepping into into that title, you already get a kind of good slap in the face a little bit, right? So it's like, when we talk about Birth of a Nation, you can't help but understand the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, and the understanding of hate. And then at the same time, this is when cotton was king, right? And in the South in particular. So you've got this connection between these hateful movements that existed. And so I made it, of course, an American flag. The American flag is 6 by 11 feet. So it's huge. It takes up the whole back wall of any place it's ever been in. And so I kind of love that because it forces you to have to really look at it. You can't ignore it because it's so large. And it's made with 184 cups. So it's huge. I really wanted 187 cups because 187 and police lingo means murder, and I just I couldn't make it actually work. But visually, it just didn't look right. So I had to take those couple of cups out, and it's so sad. But at the same time, yeah, so it's made with 184 cups. Each cup is unique. None of the designs are repeated. And so because I sat and I meticulously painted each one by hand, they all became unique in body. And so each one represents a body, of course. And you've got the white stripes, you've got the red stripes, and then you have the blue section, right, with the flag, or with the stars on it. And so instead of using actual flags, I use cotton bowls. And so they're little cotton symbols all over the ones that are the stars. And so you've got all of these stars facing forward with the blue around their body. And then what's important about that kind of design is that I actually embedded a second flag within the flag. And so you've got the 50 stars American flag, which is our current flag, but then embedded within that is the original 13 colonies flag with the circle of stars as well. And it's highlighted by its different painting method for in order to kind of make that appear, but you have to really be paying attention to see that one. And that's what I like about it, because it's like, hey, pay attention. There's still a connection between the original 13 colonies and where we exist now. We may have added more states, but the mindset hasn't quite changed. And so you've got these cups that represent all of these Black bodies, and they are bound. And so you pull, they're bound with rope. Let me also clarify that. So I'm bound with rope, and then I pull the rope off after I'm done making the piece, because I want to leave the scars of the rope on the body. Because the importance of speaking about America at this time, during this time period, both in history and now, it's that I may not currently still be in chains, but I'm left with the scars of what that left. And so, or left with the scars of that rope, right? And so you have the imprint of the scar, and then you also have markings across the cups as well. So you have where I use as like this African type of patterning, which is really just dots and dashes, and I kind of play with their design across the surface of them. Um, and that is reminiscent of or speaking to like the idea of tattooing and or scarification on the body. And so in history in Africa, it was a lot more of a scarification, right? And but they were beautifying marks, so they were meant to be these beautiful, beautiful things, and a way to kind of help solidify either your social status, your economic status, who you belong to, what tribes you belong to. It was a way of belonging. But then in America, they became a thing that separated us as well. Like being able to illustrate across your body and recall um, who you are as a person, as an individual, actually became these kind of tattooing. So I like the idea of like connecting or duality where there could be one way to read it, but then there's also another way to read it. And it's thinking about how we could begin to connect through history. Um, Now the flag also is made with I specifically got a tree to cut down for this. So it wasn't like there was a tree, like I wanted to go to Lowe's and just pick out wood. In fact, what it was is then while I was in Kansas, there was a wonderful lady who had this old rotting tree in her yard. It was an oak tree that she had cut down, and it had just been sitting in her yard for like 10 years. And I wanted this aged look, and I unfortunately I tasked Ben Alvers with finding me this like this tree and this wood, and I was like, Ben, I can't have just like new planks. It like this does not work. These need to be old sourced planks. And he just had to like look at me, and he's like, thanks for only giving me like 4 months to figure this out. And I said, I appreciate you so much, Ben, and I love you. Um, and he was like, and then I want to say maybe like a month and a half before my show went up, he comes to me and he's like, Ashlyn, I found this tree. I found it. And I was like, you found it? And he's like, yeah. He's like, we got to make planks out of them, but yeah, we can, we can do this. And I was like, yes, you know? And so they were already kind of cut into planks, but they were just too big and bulky and weird. And so Jeremy at the Lawrence Art Center as well, he is a wonderful fabricator, and he cut them and made them exactly what I was looking for. So there are these planks that are just kind of warped and aged, and they've got they're old grunge on it because they've been sitting in the weather for so long. And they just kind of speak to what I'm talking about when it comes to America. It's this old thing. It's this, it has a potential of being a beautiful thing, but it comes with so much warped history. And the planks really just kind of got to speak to that. And I was thinking of like a slave ship, like old and ragged wood, and how that can begin to play into like the passing of these Black bodies. And so these are the Black bodies sit on this really old oak in order to speak to the Middle Passage at the same time.
And I think there's something about that piece where a student, because I'm thinking about your role as the assistant director of the African Diaspora Studies at Coastal Carolina. Like, you can take a student into a class and you can give them a lecture about the Middle Passage, and they're going to hear one thing. But when they look at that flag and you tell them about your work and what these things mean, they learn the totality of that experience in a very different way than they do in a lecture. So with this work, that work specifically, what role do you think it balances between art and education, and both or neither? Or, like how do you parse that out in your mind as the maker?
For me, I'm a student of history. I am obsessed with history, art history, regular history, just all of the above. So when I'm thinking about making art, I don't like to call myself an activist because I'm actively making, but I'm not someone who's out in the streets and putting myself necessarily on the line. So I hate to call myself that. But I do think art has a chance to activate. And for me, this is an opportunity to activate. And so by quietly making a piece of work and putting on the wall, I have an opportunity to say something. And I don't like to miss those opportunities. And I think that when you are a maker, like, that is an opportunity to clue people into your own experiences. And as a Black body, I've had a lot of racial experiences against my body. And I find it very important to say something, right? And so as like a student or someone who gets to kind of study a history, it is important to actually place yourself in the line of it in order to really understand it. And I think that art does that beautiful connection where it's a safe space because it's usually in a gallery or in somewhere safe, right? A building that keeps you kind of safe, right? It gives you an opportunity to explore those really hard conversations that come along with being Black in America and what it actually looks like for someone who is Black in America. Because yeah, you can teach it all day, right? We know that students are taught facts all day, and they're expected to recall facts all day, but it means nothing when it's not felt. And so it's an opportunity to make you feel it. And I have to say, like, I've been surprised at how much people can feel it, especially when I had that flag up in my thesis show, and it's currently up at this last exhibition we were discussing earlier. That people walk in and then I have had people cry. They've walked out and they started crying, and I'm like, oh, you know, like, I didn't know it'd make you cry, but I'm glad it did, because then that means you get it. You get what I'm trying to put forward. And even though I'm just showing cups, like, you feel it, and I think that's one of the most powerful experiences that I had in association with this flag, or where like people, and it depended on how they kind of moved around the gallery at the same time too, where I had some people tell me that they walked in and they kind of just started on like one of the further sides of the room, and they start walking down and they get to the flag, but they're already so close to it that they're just looking at the fact that it's 184 cups and they're amazed by it, and then they'll like start walking to leave the gallery, and they said they happen to turn around and they're like, oh shit, it's a flag. And then they said the whole thing just kind of shifted in their mind and it dawned on them what the entire exhibition was about. And then they were like, oh my God, and then I had some people come in and they're like, immediately they look to the far back wall and they're like, holy shit. And it immediately changes the way that they're looking at the work in the room, because now they're fully aware that I'm talking about America and Black bodies, and you can no longer separate the two. And so it was really interesting to kind of see like how people are learning and like the way that learning can dawn upon them, and how impactful it can then be at the same time.
And I think cups are particularly sneaky objects because we almost ignore them in our daily life. Like we use them, but we don't necessarily think about them. And then when you display them, 184 of them, all of a sudden it starts to talk about labor, like your labor, historical Black labor, and then slave period, also sharecropping. Like there's this sense of like labor in this object or this collection of objects, which I think that's part of the amnesia that we have as Americans, is that we don't think of like, oh, right, like enslaved people built everything. Like they built federal buildings, they built local buildings, they built everything. So
yeah, they built some of the houses these people live in, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
So there's something about that number of 184 that the labor is there. Like I feel but of course I'm a potter, so I also know what it took for you to make all of that work.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, yeah, that to me is another huge like line to communicate is invisible labor. And I find it interesting that one of the stereotypes for Black people is laziness. And it's like, how were we allowed to be lazy? We weren't even allowed to be. Like it was impossible for me to be allowed to be lazy. Like, when we were lazy, we were whipped into doing work, so like there was no lazy involved. So I find that to be an interesting conversation to be had as well. Like that there's all this like invisible labor for our Black bodies. And yet we have a stereotype that is its opposite. And so I find it really intriguing to have those kinds of conversations.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art. The collection exists as an online resource for research and inspiration, featuring photos of over 4,000 objects made by over 1,000 artists. The images are high quality and can be used with no permission required, making them a great resource for students and teachers. To find out more, visit rosenfieldcollection.com.
The Bray Clay business is your best source for Bray epoxy, a two-part moldable epoxy intended for post-firing repairs. Working like clay, it's easy to shape, texture, fill gaps, and recreate missing parts. Bray epoxy is sold in tan, white, and black base colors. We also have a 9-color kit that will allow you to perfectly disguise your repair. Order online anytime at archiebrayclay.com.
I wanted to switch gears and talk about the quilting work. You've been doing some portraits recently. And actually, can you just describe the connection between Marie Antoinette specifically and wanting to depict that era in these portraits that you're making?
Absolutely. So Marie Antoinette, if you know anything about her time period, she was queen. She was born in like 1750 something, right? And she reigned as a fairly young woman with her husband into the like 80s when she was beheaded, right? So our 90s, she was beheaded, 1790s, I believe. She was beheaded. And so you've got this time frame right when America was kind of existing, right? And the Constitution was written, right? And so the American Civil War, 1776, is like when this Constitution was written, and we are in this prime time of when America started, and yet slavery is ugly and existing, right? So then in connection to that was important, like this time frame for one, right? But then also Marie Antoinette, because one, I'm slightly obsessed with Marie. Like I just have to clarify that. She was beheaded on my birthday, so that was always an interesting thing to me. So, so I've always felt connected to this random French queen, you know, and so I loved her, but this was a really powerful culture at the time. Like France was like major, you know, it had a lot of control, and I could have picked any other country and the kings and queens of any other country, but there was no connection necessarily to me at the same time. And so I wanted to look at Marie Antoinette because I thought, you know, she was this really innocent young woman who had a lot of things said and done about her that may not necessarily have been 100% true, you know, like that let them eat cake line made up, you know, like that she never said that. So like there's no historical record of her actually saying those words. So like that's kind of how I feel about being Black, you know, like there's a lot of things made up about us, and you know, and yet they're fully believed. Like we just believe it, you know? And so because one person said it at one point in time or in history, you know, and like that is a horrible kind of existence to live through. But however, so Marie Antoinette, let me keep telling you about that. So I find Marie one intriguing, right? But also she was a fashion icon, and I have a fashion degree as well. And so I love fashion. I love fabric. I think it's beautiful. It's so expressive, and an individual can express who they are. They don't have to wear exactly what somebody else is wearing. They can sit there and they can make their own clothes, which I think is incredible, you know, and express exactly how they feel as an individual person. And so Marie Antoinette, a fashion icon, um, a young queen who kind of got thrust into this place of power, and kind of not given the reputation she probably actually fully deserved. And in some sense, yes, you know, she was a young queen who, um, because she was wealthy and didn't know what she was doing, you know, she just knew she had money, you know, and the only power that a queen has is to look good, you know, and so she, you know, she don't get to rule nothing. She's just a figurehead, and her husband's ruling everything, and so is everybody else around her. She's not doing nothing, you know, like so she's just having to exist in this world, and she decided to take beauty on for what beauty could be for her, which was clothes and fashion, her hair, her jewels. That's what she did. That's what she did, you know. And so I've always found her really intriguing as a person. And so I started making these portraits, and these portraits are kind of a nod to Afrofuturism. Like by moving into the future, I get to redesign what the past looked like, you know? And so I started making a series called Portraits of a Queen. And they begin to kind of explore Afrofuturism by looking at an alternative history. And so Marie Antoinette, when it comes to what we have left of her, we have portraits left of her, right? And so there's a lot of different portraits from different ages of her. But there was one portrait that was massively significant. So one, let's clarify that what's also important about Marie Antoinette's reign in these portraits is that they were painted by a woman. And she was her portrait painter, which was so rare that you have a woman portrait painter for the queen. Like mind-boggling, especially during this time frame, you know, that a woman had this kind of power as a painter. But then also this portrait, there was a particular portrait, and it is Marie Antoinette in her chemise. And that's what it's called. And it was a painting by Elizabeth Vigée Lebrun, and I'm pretty sure I'm screwing up her name, but I always found that incredible. And so this portrait was really important. It was a really important photo or a painting, in particular because the history that came with it. So this painting was of Marie Antoinette in a cotton chemise dress. And I mean, just like this beautiful, flowy fabric. and she's like holding a rose in her hand, and she has like a hat on, and she's just kind of like chilling, you know. And this is like a portrait that was painted when she was at her like one of her country estates. So she was really like laid back. She wasn't wearing silk. She's in the country, you know, like what? No, she's not. She's relaxing, you know. She's on vacation, guys. Okay, she's on vacation. And so like she's gotten this portrait painted, and it ends up getting hung in like L'Academy's salon, you know. And they look at this painting, and people are mortified. I mean, everyone around her are mortified because this is the queen in her underwear. How dare you paint the queen in her underwear, you know? But because she was a fashion icon, when that painting went up, it immediately like caught hold of the people in these rooms looking at this painting. And it, like these women who got to see this painting were like, oh, I want that. I want to be just like her, because I mean, she was a fashion icon in her day, you know, not like past her day, in her day. So they wanted to be just like her, you know. And so all of these like middle class and wealthy women who could actually afford to get gowns and things made for them, that's what they wanted to look like. But it was controversial. They like, you know, like all the higher up men were just like, take it down. You don't paint a queen like that, you know? And they made Elizabeth repaint this painting with her wearing a silk gown. So we don't know that there's these two distinct paintings of the same thing. But when that cotton chemise dress went up and everybody wanted it, well, guess what? Now there's a high demand for cotton. Well, where was cotton coming from, really? America, which was being produced by slaves, which then in turn called for more slaves, because now there's such a demand in Europe for this cotton chemise dress. So despite the fact that Marie Antoinette was this very innocent person, I believe, okay, because she's a woman with no power, really, you know. I believe because she was just so innocent, she couldn't have calculated that this history or this painting would change kind of the landscape of the world, and especially America.
We should spell out the connection between cotton. Like, it was American Southern cotton produced by enslaved people, shipped across, made into fabric, made into these fancy dresses. But what's wild about the actual picture, because I looked at it in preparation for this, is that chemise dress is, to us, it just looks like a dress. Like, at that time, it was the dress under the dress, and then underneath the chemise would have been a little bit more of a like a slip. So there's like multiple layers of fabric. And I always think about these women as being contained by that fabric, and the men too. They were kind of wrapped in a way, like mummified by their own fashion.
Yeah, restricted.
Yeah, restricted. Yeah, it was all about that restriction. And there's something interesting about the way that you're depicting in the portraits now, and make the connection between the portraits you're making now are Black women in historical poses. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So yeah, I am literally basing them off, or at least the current three that I've worked on are off of Marie Antoinette portraits, but I redesigned them. They're not identical to them. They just take on certain aspects of those paintings. So it could be the sitting pose, right? This queenly like pose to kind of mimic these paintings. But that's probably mostly all that exists as the connection between them, because these are Black women, and you've got their clothing starts to change as well. So their clothing is very much inspired by individualism. So like they're not wearing something like that is going to be restricting them necessarily. So like one of my women, she has her belly out. Her whole midsection is open, you know, and you can see like yeah, her navel, you know, and she's just got like a beautiful top on that is designed to be more queenly. And then she's got a full skirt on, to be queenly, but her midsection's out, and so like you've got, I actually think I did that across both two portraits, but then there's another one who's wearing like it's an African pattern underneath that idea of this cotton chemise dress. So the one that mimics this cotton chemise painting is she's got like an African pattern, like tighter dress underneath, and then you've got this sheer fabric like on over top of it with like embroidery, flower embroidery on it as well, kind of hinting towards like a European more style, but with an African underlay. And so you've got this moment to kind of understand that there is a connection, but I'm not speaking to the same levels of restriction that was required for these poor queens at the time. They wanted them to be like living dolls in a way, and I was like, no, well, these are people, they're not dolls, so we're going to make them have personality and exist and with themselves on the surface. So yeah, I've changed their patterning. I've changed a lot of different things in order to make them come alive. And I will say, so like, it's not just their figures that's important in this and these portraits that I've made. And when you get a chance to see them, they've got these symbols in the background of them. And you can't necessarily see the full symbol. And it's just kind of sneak peek to the symbol in the background, the quilt that these figures sit on. But they are nods to the Underground Railroad. So one of the first images, it's the one with the cotton chemise dress design portrait. There is what's called in the background, it's called a monkey wrench. It's a yellow shape in the back. And that style is called a monkey wrench. The monkey wrench in underground quilts were a nod to being like, hey, gather your tools because a journey's on the way. So it's about getting ready because there's something about to happen. The second portrait, there's one where there's like these little blue squares and like blue triangles up in the corner. Well, those are called a bear paw pattern. And in the language of quilts, the bear paw pattern during the Underground Railroad was a symbol to head towards the mountains and follow bear paw tracks. And the point is that bears, especially because this is talking about the coastal region of the South, right? The Appalachian Mountains are the closest thing. So it's about following black bear trails because they will lead you to water. So you're not starving and dying while you're running. And so it's about getting to the next location safely. And then the last one is the North Star. So yeah, I mean, follow the North Star to the north and find freedom. So there's a lot of connection, not just into the portraits of Marie, but in the language that's existing in their patterning as well for the quilts and their backgrounds.
And they're also just so beautifully quilted, the layers of information that you're mentioning. There's a royalty to the presentation that I think is important. That it's something that puts Black beauty in a way that doesn't show up always in American art galleries.
Yes, I agree with that, and I think it was important to do that for me, like, and because I think in a way too, I'm at that kind of juncture in my own life is trying to understand, that there's a history that I can't trace, but so far back, and so why can't I redefine what that meant? And instead of it being erasure, it's just a redefining. And so I think like I have to say, so like I have been doing a lot of genealogy research too lately and trying to figure out like where my ancestors have come from and how I am connected to those people. And one where the Nigerian pots are really important. I'm mostly Nigerian. So like when I look at that, I'm like, okay, this makes sense and why those vessels called to me, right? But then also like there's been some connection that I've been able to trace some of my white lineage back. And I was able, and if the connections are correct, which are, once again, you've got to throw your hands up, because, there's when slaves were raped, you don't necessarily know if that was the true connection, right? So you're kind of left into a weird place. But my family kept a really good amount of records, and so I can trace some of my Black ancestors back to the early 1800s, and then I was actually able to potentially find the white ancestor who had the baby with the Black woman, and then I was able to trace their lineage back, and they were among some of the first people asked to come here by King George. So like that was like, whoa, interesting, like they were one of the first like 30 something people who were sent to America by the king, the English king. And so like it's kind of interesting to see like how history lays itself out, and then where my own personal history begins to coincide. So now that I've discovered some of that, now I'm like, do some English queens need to get repurposed? so like there's some ideas about moving forward as well.
Well, this is a good segue to talk about the show that you have up at Piedmont University. Can you just plug that show and let people know where they can find it, and a little bit about the work that's in the show?
Sure. So right now I have a show up. It's called History of the Future, I believe is what I named it. And so it is at Piedmont University in Demorest, Georgia. That show should be up until September 26th. What is happening, or what's in the show, are some nods to some older work where you've got like the American flag in there. But then you also have these portraits. They are not just the quilts themselves, but I have started to make I'm playing with making frames out of ceramics to surround them and support them. And so there's some beautiful connection to them. Ceramic history as well. They're not totally just quilts. But then there's some pieces in there that are just quilts, that are nods towards Afrofuturism, and that you'll be able to see. You'll also see that there's this idea of climbing out of the past, where I've got some cups, like 14 or 15 cups that are coming, like kind of like cascading upward, where there's dripping of Delftware, the idea of Delftware over Black bodies of cups. And then as you begin to proceed to the top, it flips. And it's like the Black body is covered in Delftware, and then Black is starting to drip back over them. And so it's kind of like this idea of like a transition. So you've got a history of moving forward.
Well, thanks so much. This has been a big pleasure. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Ben. It was incredible to be here. And hello, everybody out there.
I'd like to thank Ashlyn for coming on the show. It was a pleasure to chat with her. And I also wanted to mention that her exhibition, A History of Moving Forward, is on display now at Piedmont University's Museum of Art until August the 25th. You can find out more about that at piedmont.edu. I wanted to take a minute and thank today's sponsors. That includes the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art, Cornell Studio Supply, and Bray Clay. If you or your organization would like to be a sponsor on the show, you can get in touch at brickyardnetwork.org. I'll be back next week with another episode. Thank you all for tuning in. If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes podcasts, and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.